so that you don't wonder what the strange looking little corner of my eye is. I was out working in the yard today and pulled up a root and smacked it right into my eye, which hurt like bloody crazy. So, can you see the red? No? Yeah. That's why you're getting that little glint of red in the corner. And yeah, it really does hurt. So, let's get to it. Got an email. If I periodically wipe my eyes because I can't see out of it. Lady says, I was talking to my daughter, Sophie, this morning, and she was in full victimhood, sobbing and kept saying there was no point to her life anymore. Anybody ever been there when somebody does this? You feel kind of helpless. She said she believed that I would love her only if she did real love. And now, because of me, she couldn't even go back to how life was before. So this is what victims do. They blame you if you don't teach them real love. They blame you if you have taught them. They blame you if they're unhappy. They blame you, whatever your choice is. The other night I held her, but today she says I only held her because she'd been doing some reading in the Real Love book and told the truth about herself a little. Then she blamed me for not calling her last night and for not wanting her around. And it just went on and on. When people are in full victimhood, nothing they say is rational, and nothing you say makes any difference. So don't get excited. The more excited they get, the more calm you get. Do not argue with them. Do not provide evidence that what she's saying is ridiculous. Never argue with the victim. They're way better at blaming than you are at defending. They've been practicing it for a lifetime. So what do I say when she says, or what do you say when she says that you hold her only because of blah, blah, blah? Because there's always a reason, always some way that you're wrong. So you listen for a while and then finally say some version of this. You'll do it in your own words. Sweetie, your pain is overwhelming your ability to see anything clearly. What you're saying is simply not true. I can't stop you from saying it or even believing it, but if you keep it up, it will only make you more unhappy. But I will not argue with you about it. I will just tell you that what you're saying isn't true and it's hurting you. That's it. Notice, no arguing, no defending, no evidence, no nothing. You're just giving her information. If she keeps arguing, you say, not true. Don't go on into further explanation. You say, not true. And if they eventually keep it up long enough, you say, why don't we talk tomorrow? Because victims just ramp it up and up. They have learned, and we've helped train them to do this. Victims have learned that the more attacking they are, the more victim-y and whiny they are, the more they get what they want. And we helped them believe that because we do give victims what they want when they whine and cry. So they figure, well, if a little of it doesn't work, then a lot of it surely would. You continue. I tried explaining how she could know that I loved her, but then I realized that she wasn't hearing anything. Her victim shield was deflecting it all. Excellent. Fine to point out the truth of the situation once, but then don't keep defending. In that condition, victims don't listen to a thing. You said in the past I would have tried to save her from this pain, and now I know it was because I didn't want to feel the effects of her splashing while she was drowning. Now I just find this kind of interaction draining, and I know that feeling. With some of my own children and with many other people, I might listen a little longer, but with any victim, eventually I say, again, like I said before, you're just feeling overwhelmed and nothing I'm saying is making any difference. So you get some sleep or go for a walk or whatever fits at that time of day, and we'll talk later or tomorrow when you're able to hear what I'm saying. I will not keep talking to somebody who's committed to victimhood. Why? The score is 0 plus 0. They're getting absolutely nothing out of what I'm saying. I'm not particularly enjoying the experience, so the score is 0 and I withdraw. It's different from running. Running is when you do it involuntarily and you're in pain or afraid. No, it's really mostly just because it's ineffective, partly because it's a little boring too, but it just doesn't work. You continue. So I told the truth about myself and my part in why she would be feeling so lost now, and then went away. I'm struggling a bit to know how I could have handled it better and the best way to respond to these kinds of calls. You did great. Victims are just nearly impossible, and eventually we have to interrupt them and give them the responsibility of choosing to either listen to us or to keep complaining and attacking and blaming. I do this every single day with one or more people. They almost always hate it because they're used to manipulating people. I just won't play. Many of them are woken up by my telling them to go rest or figure it out or whatever, but I will not continue. And I say, so I'll be going now. Goodbye. I don't wait for the conversation to tail off like it normally does in some socially acceptable way. I give them the responsibility for their behavior because they're determined not to take it. But many of those people are snapped out of it by the fact that I won't participate. They realize it's not working. But it's hard because the world is filled with this. People who blame. Blame, blame, blame. You handled it beautifully. Interestingly, the next question has a similar subject. A man attended a real love group recently, and he wrote to another member of that group, a coach, who had not been in attendance that week to tell him what had happened. The email was forwarded to me, so I'll be answering the man who wrote it, but keep in mind that it was written to another coach. The man says, I have some confusion about what happened at the end of our real love group last night. Now, just to give you a little bit of background, he was talking about two men who were having a particularly heated discussion, whom I choose to call Mr. Anger and Mr. Victim. I don't do that really to place a label on them or to criticize them, but it will help you distinguish which of the two men that I'm talking about way easier than if I call them, say, Fred and Ray, because we forget, Ray doesn't really mean anything, does it? So, not to criticize, just to help you get who's talking. So, the writer says, Mr. Victim ended up saying, I don't need that kind of feedback. And, of course, it was said with that kind of tone. And if that's all you're going to give me, then I'd appreciate it if you'd just stay quiet. Mr. Anger's response was, well, that's fine with me. You can count on it. All of this was done with voices raised and them interrupting each other. This is great stuff for a group. We tend to be afraid of this kind of confrontation, but this is how we learn. I haven't read any further yet, but I can tell you that it's a virtual certainty that as these two were lobbing grenades at each other, the rest of the group froze up and had no idea what to do. I wasn't there, but that's my bet. We hate conflict. The writer says, my confusion is over what a loving group is. I'll bet, considering what just happened. Is it not where we listen and do our best to let the speaker know that we accept and love them? Yes, but not entirely. We do want to accept and love, but that includes teaching. There's always teaching involved when we're loving. Because if we genuinely care about somebody, which is what loving is, and they believe something that's a complete lie, well then how could we let them continue speaking the lie if we care about them? You see? So loving involves teaching where somebody is believing a lie. 12-step groups are great at accepting, kind of. I mean, people stand up and say, I'm Greg, I'm an alcoholic, and everybody goes, hello, Greg. And I say, well, I haven't had a drink in 3 weeks, aren't I doing great? And the group goes, wow, aren't you great? But what if it's a complete lie? Sure, I haven't had a drink in 3 weeks, but, I've been visiting whorehouses and watching porn and beating my wife and screaming at my children. This is not a cause for celebration. So they do some accepting, but they don't do much teaching people anything. We do need to listen. We do need to accept people. But notice that you use the phrase accept and love. And loving includes teaching when somebody's clear off the track, like when they're just complaining and being a victim. Just accepting them when they're acting like victims actually tends to hurt them. So often just listening alone isn't nearly enough. The writer continues, Mr. Victim shared in his check-in that he felt, quote, empty, needing to be filled up, and missing his group in wherever he normally goes to group, because there, he says, quote, I could just walk in a room and go sit in someone's lap and be held. So this is Mr. Victim complaining that in his home group, he just gets held. And here's a really big problem with many groups. More than one problem, actually. So let's go over at least a couple. When a victim states what he needs, almost never is he right. Victims want what? Sympathy. They want for other people to solve their problems. They want other people to do their emotional work. Well, that's wrong. It doesn't work. So usually victims need to be loved and taught how to be responsible for their own feelings and behavior. Where in many groups, victims are simply coddled. And so although victims like it, I hear this from people all the time, I like it much better when, and they name some other coach, not me, I like it much better when this person just holds me and is nice to me. Yeah, and how well has that worked for you? Because for a victim, just coddling them, well, of course they like it. That's like a child saying at dinner time, but I need cotton candy. No, you like cotton candy, which isn't the same as needing it. So victims almost never know what they need. Second problem, this is just two of many possible ones we could talk about, holding. So he says, well, in my home group, I could just be held. Holding is a very powerful thing. I do it quite a bit, but it is very often misused. Look at a victim while they're being held. I don't know if you've ever done that. Most people are so distracted by the whole holding experience that they don't actually look at the face of the person being held. Victims don't look peaceful. They look pacified. They don't look supported. They look just like they've given up all the responsibility for their happiness to somebody else. Holding is often used as a cheap substitute for love, rather than as a way of communicating love. I knew this was going to happen when I started holding people many years ago, but there was no way around this. Pretty much any good thing in life can be misused, right? I mean, mathematics can be used for good. Mathematics can be used to create weapons, and biochemistry can be used to create medicines. It can be used to create toxins to kill thousands of people at a time. So it was inevitable that holding would be used for less than loving purposes. I happen to know Mr. Victim. I know him. I know him well. For a very long time, he has been in unbearable pain. Now, that pain, which was initially inflicted on him, and the pain for the first many decades of his life, not his fault. But when he heard about real love, he saw an opportunity not to learn and grow, but an opportunity for sympathy and community, friends, and fun. Not the same as love and peacefulness and growth. Not the same at all. He's had a great deal. Hang on just a second. I got a little computer thing. Never mind. Little pop-up. Love those. He's had a great deal extended to him over the years. But he doesn't do what he needs to do. He does what he wants. He always does what he wants. If you tell him what he needs to do, he just blows you off or he's offended. And not only does he do what he wants, he does what would be enjoyable. So he complains, He criticizes. He goes from one group to another until he finds the easy and pleasant way. But his many addictions continue, and he's got a bunch of them, most of which he is not honest about. He doesn't learn. It looks like he's sincere because he can tell poignant and personal truths. But he's one of those who uses truths like putting coins in a jukebox. He uses the truth to keep the sympathy and community coming, just like music from a jukebox. And he doesn't tell the whole truth, just the part that makes him look sincere. He doesn't state how his addictions continue unabated and how he's been in essentially the same emotionally bleak place for years, and that he doesn't feel the love that he's been given. He goes through the motions of truth-telling without the soul of it. So he could really mislead a group, and he'd fool 19 out of 20 people in a group. They would fall for this, oh, you hurt me business. Nah, he's been playing that game for a very long time, and he'll be way better at it than the group would be to identify it. You continue. Mr. Victim shared some very personal, I should have read further, shared some very personal and powerful truths when he spoke under the context of what I should tell you about myself that I wouldn't want you to know. Yeah, but like I said, it's a game with him. He's learned to tell the truth in a way that looks powerful and sincere, but he's just playing you. It can be a powerful way to begin a journey of making change and taking responsibility for oneself and feeling loved. But with some people, like with Mr. Victim, like I say, who I know well, so I know what I'm talking about with him, they tell the truth only to create the appearance of doing their work. They tell the truth, but then they blame their condition on other people, or they give you the responsibility of removing their pain. Like you said, well, in my home group, they just hold me. Yeah, in his home group, they give him a pacifier, stick it in his mouth, suck his thumb for him, give him cotton candy, and he likes it. Well, yeah, I'll bet. But then victims keep telling the same truths. In meeting after meeting, I've been in meetings where I've heard people say exactly the same truths while people nod their head, admiring their courage, told exactly the same truths for years, because I was there 2 years before and I'm there 2 years later, and it's the same stuff. So they do it for years and years, but they're not committed to the work necessary to choose differently. They just keep venting their pain and how they're stuck. Essentially, they take up group going, I'm drowning, I'm drowning, I'm drowning. It looks sincere. But how do you know it's not? Because they don't learn. That's how you know. You keep hearing the same thing. So two people in the beginning could look very sincere by telling these personal truths. But one then becomes responsible and begins to make different choices in the way they perceive things, in the way they feel, in the way they behave, while the other changes in no way. So that's how you tell if one person is sincere in truth-telling. You said at the end he was asked if he was open to any questions and feedback. That was very sweet of somebody, but it's the wrong question for a victim. If someone is in a group, then they've already given permission for questions and feedback. When you ask a victim if they're open, they put their hand on their chin and they consider whether feedback would fit in with their plans for sympathy and feeling good. But victims are lost. So why ask them what they need? They don't know. They really don't. They rarely take steps forward, but they are masters of telling you that whatever you do for them or with them is wrong. This is a notable characteristic of victims. They can't make choices, but they can always find fault with your choices. They're great at it. You continue. Mr. Victim answered that he would be open to questions, but that if there was one he didn't want to answer, he wouldn't. I'm glad I didn't read this ahead of time. This is right out of the victim handbook. They are stuck. Nobody gets stuck like a victim. But then they want to be in control of their own recovery, which is absurd, because if they knew what they needed, they wouldn't be stuck. You said he then had two people share with him their respect for the issues he had the courage to share with the group. Victims love this. They love to be respected for their great truth-telling, but it's a game. People don't need respect for their courage. They need to be simply understood. Respect is almost always imitation. I admire your courage really has no loving benefit. So what would help? You could say things like, I understand what you just said. I understand you. I feel closer to you as a result of your sharing that. Or now that you've shared that, how do you feel? Now that everybody's heard what you just said. Or another question you could say would be, do you understand why you have felt or behaved that way all of your life? Those are useful things to say. I respect you for your courage. Meaningless praise. After the second piece of feedback, Mr. Victim responded, a number of the groups here have been too much of a praise fest. That's not what I need. Well, that's really not true. Victims love praise. But again, victims don't know what they need. Notice that he wants to just sit in people's laps and be held. But then he says he doesn't want praise. He needs to be taught what he needs. He's very confused. He's been telling the same stories for years. And now I'm specifically talking about Mr. Victim, the one I know, the one you're talking about. And he's not happy. He's miserable. Take one look at his face. People sometimes say to me, well, how do you know I'm not happy? Well, let's see. Your body posture, your facial expression, your tone of voice, everything about your life, your list of 25 addictions. Other than that, I'm just taking a wild guess. Look at his face. Read his Facebook posts. If he comes to a seminar, for example, he studiously avoids all contact with anybody who would tell him the truth. In fact, he avoids me like leprosy. Why? Because he knows I'll tell him what I see. And he does not want that. He wants to wear the cloak of the victim, the badge of the victim, unchanging and untouchable. You continue. One of the group members then pointed out, as we had just reviewed on the second module from Greg, that there's nothing wrong with praise as long as it's delivered with no expectations of return. He seemed to get that qualifier and appreciated the clarification. But then shortly after, he and Mr. Anger got into their confrontation. I've never been in a loving group where there was any kind of confrontation or hostility, so it took me back. And I realize now I was in shock and immobilized. I mentioned this earlier. We tend to get paralyzed in the face of conflict. That's the very reason many victims are attackers. They want you to be frozen and not to teach them. You say, upon reflection, it appeared that Mr. Victim had expectations of what he wanted from the group, you think, that he was feeling alone, his bucket was empty, and he attacked when he didn't get what he expected. That's exactly what victims do. They're very predictable. You continue, the group was doing its best to love him, and it seemed like he was not in a space to accept that love unless it was in a specific format. So here we are at the bottom line. Victims are always unhappy about pretty much everything. They have no solutions, but they hate yours. They can be very frustrating. You can be very frustrating to them because you have to read their mind or they get angry. So you really have to be on your game with a victim. You really have to be paying attention and feel very solid about feeling loved about and about being loving yourself. So understand, accept, be kind, always that. Then help them see how their perspective, which apparently Mr. Anger was not doing. He was pointing out what the victim needed to learn, but he wasn't being accepting and kind. Then help them see how their perspective or judgment of a situation might be distorted, leading them to feel hurt, and that if they change their perspective, their feelings will change. That's the teaching part that follows the loving part. Okay, so Mr. Anger didn't help Mr. Victim. No surprise there. So then what do? You simply ignore what Mr. Anger did and step in as a wise man, as though Mr. Anger had not spoken at all. You don't break up the fight. You don't tell Mr. Anger how he was wrong. You don't tell the victim how he was wrong. No. Just start over and say to the victim, I understand what you're saying. This was one of the things I mentioned earlier that you could say to a victim. Your feelings are rooted in deep pain. It really helps anybody to know that their feelings all come from pain. Pain that you felt from the time that you were a child. But now you're not a child. And you have people in this room who are not the people who hurt you all your life. Right now, I am loving you. I'm not just understanding you. I'm helping you see yourself and the world differently, so you can consistently respond differently to potentially painful situations when you leave here. So you don't have to use alcohol or praise or sex or whatever to deal with your pain. Then say to the victim, what are you learning right now? That's really important, because victims nod their head. They like you patting their head. But rarely can they say back in their own words what you just taught them, because they're not listening. They're busy compiling their defense. They're busy being angry. They're busy being offended and hurt. If a victim simply feels better, like from being held, you haven't accomplished a thing. They have the same perspectives, the same lies, so they'll just keep doing the same old things when they perceive threats, which are often not real, and then they'll want more holding, more pacifying, and they will make more demands that you take responsibility for them. So leading a group is no small thing, is it? And it's little wonder that you felt sort of frozen. So I suggest read Real Love for Wise Men and Women. Read Freedom for the Soul, which is all about victims. Watch every video chat that you can. It's all in there. And then send questions in for video chats like you did this question. Don't give up. This is hard stuff. It's hard enough to find love, but to love somebody who fights, kicks, screams, and is good at it, that's really difficult. I find it critical. This is the writer of the email, back to him. I find it critical before starting any group in our house to focus on the mandate that, as Greg says in the first book, there's only one speaker at a time. We don't interrupt anyone sharing their truth out of respect. Good general idea. You continue. If after 25 years of experience, someone feels that they have the knowledge to interrupt someone, as Greg occasionally does, so be it. But other than that, my feeling is we should all be listening, hearing between the lines and trying to get the 8 out of the 2, 4, 6 that the speaker is sharing. Yes, I agree. Listen first, and then where necessary, teach. We sometimes have to teach, or the same lies and perspectives will just continue on and destroy the speaker. So that I don't make the tragic mistake that I made apparently 2 weeks ago. Time to tell a Sylvie story, which would be particularly important in light of the long list of victimhood stuff we just talked about. So Jeanette says, that's Sylvie's mom, every once in a while, John and I like to watch a particular television program on the weekend while the kids are awake. We don't want it to be difficult for them. So one way I do that is to make them each treat baskets. In each basket, there were 24 candies, all different from each other. There was one candy that I knew Bruce, age 2, would chew, drool, spit out, wipe on the furniture, and smear in the carpet. I know Bruce, so he would do this. In an effort to avoid this inconvenience, I slipped that particular treat into Sylvie's bucket, age 3. She had already nearly eaten hers and told me that it was her favorite. When she found the second one, she held it up and said, "Look, Mom, Brucey's candy got in my bucket." She handed it to him and said, "Here you go, Brucey." And she took it right to him, and the foreseen mess swiftly followed, and I loved cleaning every bit of it. What a sweet kid. How many of us would give up our favorite candy for the benefit of somebody who may not enjoy it as much as we do and who would smear half of it all over the furniture? This is how loving people behave. And she's got this at age, well, she's now 4. Here's a writer who says, "The biggest lie I'm believing is that I'm not wanted. My parents did not want me, for sure. So all my life I've worked so hard to be wanted. When I left my last job, for example, where I gave my life to them, they hired 3 people to do the job that I had been doing." That's a lot of buying approval, honey, a lot. Your whole life, probably more than you realize, and it must be exhausting. You continue. "I've worked so hard to be wanted by everybody in my life, invaluable, especially my husband. I've realized now that all this working at being wanted is a big fat lie. So I really don't know if my husband even wants me or all that I do for him. I do wait on him hand and foot. That's changed since real love. I used to do those things with expectations of something in return and needing appreciation. And then when I didn't get it, I would explode. I thought I was doing it differently because I no longer got upset that I was picking up after him and felt it was a loving act. I'm now doubting everything in my insanity." You're seeing some things about yourself that you've always hidden. Nice insights. Now the question is, can you trust the love you're getting from other people? Not your husband in this case. If you can feel loved, you won't need to feel wanted. Loved is better. Wanted gets complicated. You have to earn that most of the time. It's very tempting to feel needed or wanted, but wow, we have to work hard for that. Whereas just feeling cared for, that's free, much more fulfilling. You continue. "See, I guess I don't really know, or should I say trust, that me is what my husband wants at all. Piggybacking the lie, how could I really be lovable? I've been so mean, controlling, criticizing, demeaning, which is a lie because I'm not all those behaviors." No, you're not. All of those behaviors are responses to your pain. You continue. "I realize now that a lot of my fear about my limitations with my physical body is that I won't be able to do all these things for my husband. And if I can't, then there'd be no reason for him to stay. This has hurt me physically because I go way over my limitations, which inflames my nervous system, my muscles, my joints, and then it can take me days, weeks, even months to get back to my normal. Hence my suggestion to you that I consistently make to everyone to not give past what you have. You give what you can. And when you're done, when you're exhausted, emotionally or physically, you're finished. And you don't worry about what other people will think or say. That's also when you find out whether people really accept and love you for who you are. You keep going. "See, I've controlled and manipulated all that has happened between us, and when I have control and manipulate everything, I can't feel loved. So I believe that I've been able to have times that I'm truly giving my husband unconditional love, but because this all started with control, now I'm not trusting that he would really just want me or that he finds me attractive at all. So I'll give you a hint, since I happen to know your husband. He has told me that he's happier. He's told me that he loves you. That's without you being in the room, without there being any possibility he was going to get anything for it. He looks happier. The last time I talked to him on Skype, he just came through the camera. He just lit up. So stop it. He really is happier with you. Quit doubting yourself. Why not just take the evidence instead of creating fear out of nothing? He means it. When you are genuinely loving, which you're doing way better, he loves to be around you. So this perpetual self-doubt that you learned as a kid, yeah, you can pretty much throw that out. You say, why? I guess because I am still the only one. Why am I doubting the love in my life? Because I'm still pretty much the only one that initiates anything. Now I've been believing that it's only fear that's holding him back, but in my fear-ridden state, I'm just not sure. I need help deciphering all this. Honey, he still just has some residual fear. It's just part of who he is. He will, because of his personality, he will never initiate activities or loving events as much as you do. He doesn't have the same emotional energy. And exactly what would you like him to initiate? Tell him instead of having him read your mind, but tell him without an expectation. That's pretty difficult for you to do. So you really have to not have any expectations before you tell him what you'd like him to initiate. You say, this was a big wound that goes way deep. And as I sit in it, I can see so many tentacles where this has affected me in my life. The truth is that you love me and you want to love me, and I don't have to do anything for it. She's talking to me. So I want to get back to the truth. It's really as simple as the truth. The 5 truths that we've talked about many times. You say them 100 times a day. Go through them in your head. If that's not enough, then we'll talk. If that's not enough, you can talk to other people. You're just having a temporary struggle with lifelong lies. They're all lies, honey. Just as a postscript to those of you who are listening, after this particular email exchange, I can't remember whether part of it was email or part of it was phone, she said, probably a week or so later, that everything was enormously better. She just began to trust that her husband was genuine when he said that he enjoyed being with her instead of doubting. As long as we doubt, we'll never have enough proof. It's all about faith, all about trust. I've known Sylvia for years, a woman that I've counseled with on many occasions. And she called the other day, and she began by saying this phrase, which I have now heard, 10,000 times, not just from her, but from everybody. She said, I'm struggling with. And then she described one problem after another. We let this go on far too long. We let people wallow in their problems over and over and over. It doesn't help. It is a lie that as we describe our misery or our problems, we let them go. That's a common belief in self-help books. It's a common belief in therapy. No, we just perpetuate the problem as we describe it and describe it. Imagine if you got up here. I said to one man who was telling me, I'm afraid. I said, if I got up in the morning and I started my day with, I'm afraid, it wouldn't take me very long before I'd become afraid of something. We perpetuate what we describe the most. We become what we think. So we need to focus more on the solutions. And that only makes sense. How long does it take to describe a problem? Take hunger. How long does it take you to recognize that you're physically hungry? How long? Minutes? Seconds? How long does it take you to describe it? I can tell you how long it takes me. I'm hungry. I want to eat. Then what? Well, I could keep describing the problem, or I could just eat. There's no sense describing it over and over, but every day I go through this with somebody. Somebody screams, "I'm hungry." I hand them a plate of food. They throw it on the floor and scream, "I'm hungry." And I hand them a plate of food, in other words, loving them. They throw it on the floor and scream, "I'm hungry." A 14-year-old girl in real love wrote to me just a few days ago. I'm going to get the quote wrong. If I do, it doesn't matter. I'll publish it as a blog before long. And she said, "Unhappy people are like people who are trying to pull open a door that will only open by pushing. Then somebody comes along who pushes the door open and walks right on through. Unhappy people keep pulling on the door and crying and screaming and complaining that they can't get through the door." This is a 14-year-old. And that's what victims and unhappy people do. They keep describing what they struggle with. Or you could just push the door open. Really. Turns out that solving the problem takes less effort. Let me say this again. Solving the problem takes less effort than constantly describing it and perpetuating it. No kidding. And it's happier to boot. The solution is sitting right in front of us. You or me, to anybody. Pay attention to that. All we have is right now. Make use of that. Identifying problems requires so little skill. Victims are masters at it. It's easy to see a forest fire, for example. No intellectual challenge there, but after a problem is identified, it's time to recognize and implement the solution. Now. Don't make it complicated. Don't waste time doubting the solution or yourself. Just take action. Do something. Anything. Make mistakes, but move. Find love. Trust the love you find. Remember it. With love, fear is then banished, and with a clear mind, you can find a great many other solutions. Solutions are way better than identifying problems. This writer says, "My wife, Trish, is always fussing about my ex-wife. She thinks that my ex controls me. I make too many concessions," she says. "I agree to pay for expenses for the daughter that we had together, my ex and I, but that are not required by the divorce decree. My ex often can't pick my daughter up from school on time because of her own lack of responsibility, and I do tend to rescue her. And Trish thinks that I'm being controlled by my ex, and she hates it. And she hates it that she learns about the things I've decided long after I've agreed to do them, so she feels left out." So, first, be truthful about why you do these extra things for your daughter all the time. Sure, it's for your daughter, and when you say, "Well, I'm doing it for the good of my daughter," well, then nobody would ever dare to confront you who could get in the way of loving your child. But A, does your daughter really need the things you buy for her? Because I know some of the things that have been bought for her, and they're not necessarily things she needs. And B, are you helping your ex out of obligation or guilt? You have to know this before you proceed. You can't just say, "Well, but it's for my daughter." Yeah, in the name of "it's just for my daughter," we've raised an entire generation of entitled kids. 2, you got to talk to Trish, your present wife, and admit where you've been selfish or where you've behaved fearfully. Tell her where she's been right. Then you need to assure Trish that you will keep her informed and quit doing things in secret because you're afraid. Keep remembering that Trish is your partner and she's first. And there have been many times because you've been afraid of Trish that you've just gone ahead and done things for your daughter and then hoped she wouldn't find out. Well, that's what's really bothering her more than anything else. But in addition to that, you and Trish both need to understand that you're never going to change your ex. She's going to keep being demanding and selfish and difficult and victim-y, and you can't change that, which is, sort of, by the way, why you divorced her. So tell Trish that you're not going to have any more discussions about your ex anymore. None. You'll be happy to talk about telling her sooner about the things you're going to do for your daughter. You'd be happy to talk to her about plans that are being made or changing plans. But you are not going to talk about your ex. I mean, you divorced the woman so you wouldn't have to talk about her or to her, didn't you? Zero. Make it a clear policy. There's just no sense having discussions about her. Here's a writer who says, I'm in pain and believing lies. I do tell my husband when I hit my wall and I'm incapable of doing anything. When you say to talk about the pain in our lives, do you mean talking about the physical pain as well? Yes, but you talk about any pain, physical or otherwise, to someone who can listen to you or help you, not to someone who can't. Because on many occasions you tell your husband about your pain when you can see in his face that he doesn't want to hear one word about it. There's nothing he can do. So then it just feels like you're browbeating him. Just makes him feel like you're making him feel guilty or obligated. You said, I was intolerant. Let's see. One of my physical problems is that when I get hot, it's hard for me to bring my body temperature to normal, and so I'm in a lot more pain. So physically, it's more of a challenge. The lie is that I cannot be happy with more pain. The truth is that I still can be happy. Yes, you can, and you can ask for steps to help you with your temperature. So, for example, if you're feeling cold, you can ask for more blankets. You could ask him for that and talk to him ahead of time that you might ask him for that. You might, for example, if you get exceptionally hot, I can't tell you how many people I've known who are constantly jacking the temperature of their house up and down, especially down when they get hot, when all you really have to do is get a room air conditioner for all of $150 for the room you're in. Then you don't have to spend what it costs to cool the entire house just to cool you. So you get a room air conditioner and a fan, but we don't think about those things. When we're feeling victim-y, we tend to say, I want the temperature down. And then when our partner doesn't agree, then we feel victim-y about that. Solve the problem without the whining. You continue. No, that's enough. We've gone over that pretty much. Here's a woman who is a controller. She beats her husband into submission, emotionally speaking. The kids are anxious. The oldest daughter, who's only 8 years old, is now doing the same thing. I spent some time with the mother. I told her that she was controlling and oblivious and refusing to acknowledge it. She's always busy with everything that doesn't matter and never spends any time with her kids except to control them. Oh, she hated that. She sulked for days, but she finally wrote and said, I haven't stopped thinking about our conversation. I have so many thoughts and questions running through my head. Well, good for you. You were simply sold more lies in childhood than you can imagine. That's not your fault. Nobody meant to, but look at the world and where it's headed. Lies are winning. People are not striving for what is loving. They're being increasingly selfish and hurting everyone. In fact, in the world now, we don't even talk about what's moral or what's right or what's loving. We talk about what we can get away with. And nobody even realizes it until that all this is going on, until there's a school shooting or something dramatic. And by then it's too late and nobody learns from that either. And then there's another school shooting and then we figure it must be the guns. And then there was a kid just the other day who didn't use guns. Instead, he stabbed everybody he could get a hold of at school. So, boy, are we missing the problem. You said, why am I so stubborn and always have to be right? Pain. You did not get the love you needed, so you discovered the power and the adrenaline rush that come from being right. And baby, early on, you loved that feeling. You discovered also that it kept people from criticizing you when you demanded that you were right, which you came to hate as a child. You'll do anything to avoid being wrong, which is really what being right is. You continue, how do I be wrong, feel loved, and be loving when I'm always right? Well, you can't. If you even have a twinge of defending yourself, a twinge of saying that you're right, you can pretty much be certain that you're not. You're not being loving. You're not listening. So just stop before you speak. You say, I want to have an open, clear vision of what I can be like. But you're right. My always being right is blocking me. So how do I change? Well, practice, honey. Practice going a whole day. Practice going a whole day defending yourself not once. Practice thinking before you open your mouth every time. Practice for one day not telling somebody else that they're wrong even once, and see what it's like for you. And in fact, for a whole day, this might require that you be utterly silent. If you can't be wrong, you can at least be quiet. Sometimes that's a good first step. You continue. What I learned from yesterday. Every time I try to be right, I'm wrong. Yes! Now, sometimes people get confused about the details. I mean, if you say 2 + 2 is 4, you're right. Yeah, but that's a thing that it's right. That's right. It's not you being right or you insisting on being right. If you have any emotional energy around being right, you're being wrong because you're not being loving. 2, you say, when I say, I feel you are being, it's a cop-out. And I'm sincere about it. By way of explanation, what this woman does is, when she attacks people, she uses the word, I feel, and then she calls it a feeling. So during our conversation, the one that she and I had, she said, well, from what I've read in Real Love, I feel that in this conversation, you're being hypocritical and harsh with me. I said, do you know how attacking you're being? No, I'm just describing how I feel. Which is another clever way of being right. So she's learned that she uses I feel as another way of lying and being right. She said, I realize that your time is valuable and that you are offering it to me for free. And I took you for granted that you would be there whenever I needed you and that you would say whatever I wanted you to say. Oh, that's a great insight. So she said, the last important thing she said was, I need your help. I want to be a great wife. I want to be a happy person. I want to be a better mother. And I know I can do all that if I'll just listen. This is a great lesson for all of us. We're all stuck in patterns of behavior of some kind. Patterns of perspective, patterns of lies, patterns of feelings. In the end, if we're not happy, and I don't mean entertained or feeling powerful or enjoying pleasure, if we're not truly happy deep inside, then what we're doing isn't working. It's wrong. We need to examine it. We need to talk to wise men and women who can help us see the error of our thinking. Remember, I think the second person who was writing to me, who wrote to his coach actually, who forwarded it to me, was talking about a conflict in group between Mr. Victim and Mr. Angry. Until we help people like Mr. Victim see how their beliefs are wrong, until we use wise men to see how what we believe is wrong, we're stuck in the same trap. We're stuck in the same beliefs, same feelings, same behaviors forever. We all need the help. We need to practice telling the truth about ourselves, feeling the love that people can offer us, trusting the love that they give us, and then remembering it for the times that are difficult. If we can do that, we can create consistently happy and peaceful and loving lives. I think we can learn to do that. It's been really fun being with you. I'll see you in a week.